2. There had been no one upon the beach as I came in, and naturally I expected to see no further swimmers that night. Yet when I looked again from the window, there appeared surely to be figures blotting the grime of the wet evening. I counted 3 moving about in some incomprehensible manner, and close to the house another, which may not have been a person but a wave-ejected log, for the surf was now pounding fiercely. I was startled to no little degree, and wondered for what purpose those hardy persons stayed out in such a storm. And then I thought that perhaps, like myself, they had been caught unintentionally in the rain and had surrendered to the watery gusts. In another moment, prompted by a certain civilized hospitality which overcame my love of solitude, I stepped to the door and emerged momentarily, at the cost of another wetting, for the rain promptly descended upon me in exultant fury, on the small porch, gesticulating toward the people. But whether they did not see me or did not understand, they made no returning signal. Dim in the evening, they stood as if half surprised, or as if they awaited some other action from me. There was in their attitude something of that cryptic blankness, signifying anything or nothing which the house wore about itself as seen in the morbid sunset. Abruptly there came to me a feeling that a sinister quality lurked about those unmoving figures who chose to stay in the rainy night upon a beach, deserted by all people, and I closed the door with a surge of annoyance, which sought all too vainly to disguise a deeper emotion of fear, a consuming fright that welled up from the shadows of my consciousness. A moment later, when I had stepped to the window, there seemed to be nothing outside but the portentous night. Vaguely puzzled and even more vaguely frightened, like one who has seen no alarming thing but is apprehensive of what may be found in the dark street he is soon compelled to cross, I decided that I had very possibly seen no one, and that the murky air had deceived me. The aura of isolation about the place increased that night. Though just out of sight on the northward beach, 100 houses rose in the rainy darkness, their light bleared and yellow above streets of polished glass, like goblin eyes reflected in an oily forest pool. Yet because I could not see them, or even reach them in bad weather, since I had no car nor any way to leave the crouching house except by walking in the figure-haunted darkness, I realized quite suddenly that I was to all intents alone with the dreary sea that rose and subsided unseen, unkenned in the mist. And the voice of the sea had become a hoarse groan, like that of something wounded which shifts about before trying to rise. Fighting away the prevalent gloom with a soiled lamp, for the darkness crept in at my windows and sat peering obscurely at me from the corners like a patient animal, I prepared my food, since I had no intention of going to the village. The hour seemed incredibly advanced, though it was not yet 9 o'clock when I went to bed. Darkness had come early and furtively, and throughout the remainder of my stay lingered evasively over each scene and action which I beheld. Something had settled out of the night, something forever undefined, but stirring a latent sense within me, so that I was like a beast expecting the momentary rustle of an enemy. There were hours of wind, and sheets of the downpour flapped endlessly on the meagre walls, barring it from me. Lulls came in which I heard the mumbling sea, and I could guess that large formless waves jostled one another in the pallid whine of the winds, and flung on the beach a spray bitter with salt. Yet in the very monotony of the restless elements I found a lethargic note, a sound that beguiled me after a time into slumber grey and colourless as the night. The sea continued its mad monologue, and the wind her nagging, but these were shut out by the walls of unconsciousness, and for a time the night ocean was banished from a sleeping mind. Morning brought an enfeebled sun, a sun like that which men will see when the earth is old, if there are any men left, a sun more weary than the shrouded, moribund sky. faint echo of its old image, Phoebus strove to pierce the ragged, ambiguous clouds as I awoke, at moments sending a wash of pale gold rippling across the northwestern interior of my house, at others waning till it was only a luminous ball, like some incredible plaything forgotten on the celestial lawn. After a while, the falling rain, which must have continued throughout the previous night, succeeded in washing away those vestiges of purple cloud which had been like the ocean cliffs in an old fairy tale. Cheated alike of the setting and rising sun, that day merged with the day before, as if the intervening storm had not ushered a long darkness into the world, but had swollen and subsided into one long afternoon. Gaining heart, the furtive sun exerted all his force in dispelling the old mist, streaked now like a dirty window, and cast it from his realm. The shallow blue day advanced as those grimy wisps retreated, and the loneliness which had encircled me welled back into a watchful place of retreat, whence it went no farther, but crouched and waited. The ancient brightness was now once more upon the sun, and the old glitter on the waves, whose playful blue shapes had flocked upon that coast ere man was born, and would rejoice unseen when he was forgotten in the sepulchre of time. Influenced by these thin assurances, like one who believes the smile of friendship on an enemy's features, I opened my door, and as it swung outward, a black spot upon the inward burst of light, I saw the beach washed clean of any track, as if no foot before mine had disturbed the smooth sand. With the quick lift of spirit that follows a period of uneasy depression, I felt, in a purely yielding fashion and without volition, that my own memory was washed clean of all the mistrust and suspicion and disease-like fear of a lifetime, just as the filth of the water's edge succumbs to a particularly high tide and is carried out of sight. There was a scent of soaked, brackish grass, like the mouldy pages of a book, commingled with a sweet odour, born of the hot sunlight upon inland meadows, and these were borne into me like an exhilarating drink, seeping and tingling through my veins as if they would convey to me something of their own impalpable nature and float me dizzily in the aimless breeze. And conspiring with these things, the sun continued to shower upon me, like the rain of yesterday, an incessant array of bright spears, as if it also wished to hide that suspected background presence which moved beyond my sight and was betrayed only by a careless rustle on the borders of my consciousness, or by the aspect of blank figures staring out of an ocean void. That sun, a fierce ball solitary in the whirlpool of infinity, was like a horde of golden moths against my upturned face. A bubbling white grail of fire, divine and incomprehensible, it withheld from me 1,000 promised mirages where it granted one. For the sun did actually seem to indicate realms, secure and fanciful, where if I but knew the path I might wander in this curious exaltation. Such things come of our own natures, for life has never yielded for one moment her secrets. And it is only in our interpretation of their hinted images that we may find ecstasy or dullness, according to a deliberately induced mood. Yet ever and again we must succumb to her deceptions, believing for the moment that we may this time find the withheld joy. And in this way the fresh sweetness of the wind, on a morning following the haunted darkness, whose evil intimations had given me a greater uneasiness than any menace to my body, whispered to me of ancient mysteries only half linked with earth, and of pleasures that were the sharper because I felt that I might experience only a part of them. The sun and wind and that scent that rose upon them told me of festivals of gods whose senses are 1,000,000-fold more poignant than man's, and whose joys are 1,000,000-fold more subtle and prolonged. These things, they hinted, could be mine if I gave myself wholly into their bright, deceptive power. And the sun, a crouching god with naked celestial flesh, an unknown too mighty furnace upon which I might not look, seemed almost sacred in the glow of my newly sharpened emotions. The ethereal, thunderous light it gave was something before which all things must worship, astonished. The slinking leopard in his green, chasmed forest must have paused briefly to consider its leaf-scattered rays, and all things nurtured by it must have cherished its bright message on such a day. For when it is absent in the far reaches of eternity, earth will be lost, and black against an illimitable void. That morning, in which I shared the fire of life, and whose brief moment of pleasure is secure against the ravenous years, was astir with the beckoning of strange things whose elusive names can never be written. As I made my way toward the village, wondering how it might look after a long-needed scrubbing by the industrious rain, I saw, tangled in a glimmer of sunlit moisture that was poured over it like a yellow vintage, a small object like a hand some 20 feet ahead of me, and touched by the repetitious foam. The shock and disgust born in my startled mind when I saw that it was indeed a piece of rotten flesh overcame my new contentment and engendered a shocked suspicion that it might actually be a hand. Certainly no fish or part of one could assume that look, and I thought I saw mushy fingers wed in decay. I turned the thing over with my foot, not wishing to touch so foul an object, and it adhered stickily to the leather shoe, as if clutching with the grasp of corruption. The thing, whose shape was nearly lost, held too much resemblance to what I feared it might be, and I pushed it into the willing grasp of a seething wave, which took it from sight with an alacrity not often shown by those ravelled edges of the sea. Perhaps I should have reported my find, yet its nature was too ambiguous to make action natural, since it had been partly eaten by some ocean-dwelling monstrousness. I did not think it identifiable enough to form evidence of an unknown but possible tragedy. The numerous drownings, of course, came into my mind, as well as other things lacking in wholesomeness, some of which remained only as possibilities. Whatever the storm-dislodged fragment may have been, and whether it were fish or some animal akin to man, I have never spoken of it until now. After all, there was no proof that it had not merely been distorted by rottenness into that shape. I approached the town, sickened by the presence of such an object amidst the apparent beauty of the clean beach, though it was horribly typical of the indifference of death in a nature which mingles rottenness with beauty, and perhaps loves the former more. In Elston I heard of no recent drowning or other mishap of the sea, and found no reference to such in the columns of the local paper, the only one I read during my stay. It is difficult to describe the mental state in which succeeding days found me, always susceptible to morbid emotions whose dark anguish might be induced by things outside myself, or might spring from the abysses of my own spirit. I was ridden by a feeling which was not of fear or despair, or anything akin to these, but was rather a perception of the brief hideousness and underlying filth of life, a feeling partly a reflection of my internal nature and partly a result of broodings induced by that gnawed, rotten object which may have been a hand. In those days my mind was a place of shadowed cliffs and dark moving figures, like the ancient, unsuspected realm which the fairy tale recalled to me. I felt, in brief agonies of disillusionment, the gigantic blackness of this overwhelming universe in which my days and the days of my race were as nothing to the shattered stars. A universe in which each action is vain, and even the emotion of grief a wasted thing. The hours I had previously spent in something of regained health, contentment and physical well-being were given now, as if those days of the previous week were something definitely ended, to an indolence like that of a man who no longer cares to live. I was engulfed by a piteous, lethargic fear of some ineluctable doom which would be, I felt, the completed hate of the peering stars and of the black enormous waves that hoped to clasp my bones within them, the vengeance of all the indifferent, horrendous majesty of the night ocean. Something of the darkness and restlessness of the sea had penetrated my heart, so that I lived in an unreasoning, unperceiving torment, a torment none the less acute because of the subtlety of its origin and the strange, unmotivated quality of its vampiric existence. Before my eyes lay the phantasmagoria of the purpling clouds, the strange silver bauble, the recurrent stagnant foam, the loneliness of that bleak-eyed house, and the mockery of the puppet town. I no longer went to the village, for it seemed only a travesty of life. Like my own soul, it stood upon a dark, enveloping sea, a sea grown slowly hateful to me. And among these images, corrupt and festering, dwelt that of an object whose human contours left ever smaller the doubt of what it once had been. These scribbled words can never tell of the hideous loneliness, something I did not even wish assuaged, so deeply was it embedded in my heart, which had insinuated itself within me, mumbling of terrible and unknown things stealthily circling nearer. It was not a madness, rather it was a too clear and naked perception of the darkness beyond this frail existence, lit by a momentary sun no more secure than ourselves, a realization of futility that few can experience and ever again touch the life about them, a knowledge that turn as I might, battle as I might with all the remaining power of my spirit, I could neither win an inch of ground from the inimical universe, nor hold for even a moment the life entrusted to me. Fearing death as I did life, burdened with a nameless dread, yet unwilling to leave the scenes evoking it, I awaited whatever consummating horror was shifting itself in the immense region beyond the walls of consciousness. Thus autumn found me, and what I had gained from the sea was lost back into it. Autumn on the beaches, a drear time betokened by no scarlet leaf nor any other accustomed sign. A frightening sea which changes not, though man changes. There was only a chilling of the waters, in which I no longer cared to enter. A further darkening of the pall-like sky, as if eternities of snow were waiting to descend upon the ghastly waves. Once that descent began, it would never cease, but would continue beneath the white and the yellow and the crimson sun, and beneath that ultimate small ruby, which shall yield only to the futilities of night. The once friendly waters babbled meaningfully at me, and eyed me with a strange regard. Yet whether the darkness of the scene were a reflection of my own broodings, or whether the gloom within me were caused by what lay without, I could not have told. Upon the beach and me alike had fallen a shadow, like that of a bird which flies silently overhead, a bird whose watching eyes we do not suspect till the image on the ground repeats the image in the sky, and we look suddenly upward to find that something has been circling above us, hitherto unseen. The day was in late September, and the town had closed the resorts where mad frivolity ruled empty, fear-haunted lives, and where raddled puppets performed their summer antics. The puppets were cast aside, smeared with the painted smiles and frowns they had last assumed, and there were not 100 people left in the town. Again, the gaudy, stucco-fronted buildings lining the shore were permitted to crumble undisturbed in the wind. As the month advanced to the day of which I speak, there grew in me the light of a grey, infernal dawn, wherein I felt some dark thaumaturgy would be completed. Since I feared such a thaumaturgy less than a continuance of my horrible suspicions, less than the too elusive hints of something monstrous lurking behind the great stage, it was with more speculation than actual fear that I waited unendingly for the day of horror which seemed to be nearing. The day, I repeat, was late in September, though whether the 22nd or 23rd I am uncertain. Such details have fled before the recollection of those uncompleted happenings, episodes with which no orderly existence should be plagued because of the damnable suggestions, and only suggestions, they contain. I knew the time with an intuitive distress of spirit, a recognition too deep for me to explain. Throughout those daylight hours I was expectant of the night, impatient perhaps so that the sunlight passed like a half-glimpsed reflection in rippled water, a day of whose events I recall nothing. It was long since that portentous storm had cast a shadow over the beach, and I had determined, after hesitations caused by nothing tangible, to leave Elston, since the year was chilling and there was no return to my earlier contentment. When a telegram came for me, lying 2 days in the Western Union office before I was located, so little was my name known, saying that my design had been accepted, winning above all others in the contest, I set a date for leaving. This news, which earlier in the year would have affected me strongly, I now received with a curious apathy. It seemed as unrelated to the unreality about me, as little pertinent to me, as if it were directed to another person whom I did not know, and whose message had come to me through some accident. Nonetheless, it was that which forced me to complete my plans and leave the cottage by the shore. There were only 4 nights of my stay remaining when there occurred the last of those events whose meaning lies more in the darkly sinister impression surrounding them than in anything obviously threatening. Night had settled over Elston and the coast, and a pile of soiled dishes attested both to my recent meal and to my lack of industry. Darkness came as I sat with a cigarette before the seaward window, and it was a liquid which gradually filled the sky, washing in a floating moon, monstrously elevated. The flat sea bordering upon the gleaming sand, the utter absence of tree or figure or life of any sort, and the regard of that high moon made the vastness of my surroundings abruptly clear. There were only a few stars pricking through, as if to accentuate by their smallness the majesty of the lunar orb and of the restless, shifting tide. I had stayed indoors, fearing somehow to go out before the sea on such a night of shapeless portent, but I heard it mumbling secrets of an incredible law. Borne to me on a wind out of nowhere was the breath of some strange and palpitant life, the embodiment of all I had felt and of all I had suspected, stirring now in the chasms of the sky or beneath the mute waves. In what place this mystery turned from an ancient, horrible slumber I could not tell, but like one who stands by a figure lost in sleep, knowing that it will awake in a moment, I crouched by the windows holding a nearly burnt-out cigarette and faced the rising moon. Gradually there passed into that never-stirring landscape a brilliance intensified by the overhead glimmerings, and I seemed more and more under some compulsion to watch whatever might follow. The shadows were draining from the beach, and I felt that they took with were all which might have been a harbour for my thoughts when the hinted thing should come. Where any of them did remain, they were ebon and blank, still lumps of darkness sprawling beneath the cruel, brilliant rays. The endless tableau of the lunar orb, dead now, whatever her past was, and cold as the unhuman sepulchres she bears amid the ruin of dusty centuries older than man, and the sea, astir perhaps with some unkenned life, some forbidden sentience, confronted me with a horrible vividness. I arose and shut the window, partly because of an inward prompting, but mostly, I think, as an excuse for transferring momentarily the stream of thought. No sound came to me now as I stood before the closed panes. Minutes or eternities were alike. I was waiting, like my own fearing heart and the motionless scene beyond, for the token of some ineffable life. I had set the lamp upon a box in the western corner of the room, but the moon was brighter, and her bluish rays invaded places where the lamplight was faint. The ancient glow of the round, silent orb lay upon the beach as it had lain for eons, and I waited in a torment of expectancy made doubly acute by the delay in fulfillment and the uncertainty of what strange completion was to come. Outside the crouching hut, a white illumination suggested vague spectral forms whose unreal, phantasmal motions seemed to taunt my blindness, just as unheard voices mocked my eager listening. For countless moments I was still, as if time and the tolling of her great bell were hushed into nothingness. And yet there was nothing which I might fear. The moon-chiseled shadows were unnatural in no contour, and veiled nothing from my eyes. The night was silent. I knew that despite my closed window, and all the stars were fixed mournfully in a listening heaven of dark grandeur. No motion from me then, or word now, could reveal my plight, or tell of the fear-racked brain imprisoned in flesh, which dared not break the silence for all the torture it brought. As if expectant of death and assured that nothing could serve to banish the soul peril I confronted, I crouched with a forgotten cigarette in my hand. A silent world gleamed beyond the cheap, dirty windows, and in one corner of the room a pair of dirty oars, placed there before my arrival, shared the vigil of my spirit. The lamp burned endlessly, yielding a sick light, hued like a corpse's flesh. Glancing at it now and again, for the desperate distraction it gave, I saw that many bubbles unaccountably rose and vanished in the kerosene-filled base. Curiously enough, there was no heat from the wick. And suddenly I became aware that the night as a whole was neither warm nor cold, but strangely neutral, as if all physical forces were suspended and all the laws of a calm existence disrupted. Then, with an unheard splash which sent from the silver water to the shore a line of ripples echoed in fear by my heart, a swimming thing emerged beyond the breakers. The figure may have been that of a dog, a human being, or something more strange. It could not have known that I watched. Perhaps it did not care. But like a distorted fish, it swam across the mirrored stars and dived beneath the surface. After a moment it came up again, and this time, since it was closer, I saw that it was carrying something across its shoulder. I knew then that it could be no animal, and that it was a man, or something like a man, which came toward the land from a dark ocean, but it swam with a horrible ease. As I watched, dread-filled and passive, with the fixed stare of one who awaits death in another, yet knows he cannot avert it, the swimmer approached the shore, though too far down the southward beach for me to discern its outlines or features. Obscurely loping, with sparks of moonlit foam scattered by its quick gait, it emerged and was lost among the inland dunes. Now I was possessed by a sudden recurrence of fear, which had died away in the previous moments. There was a tingling coldness all over me, though the room, whose window I dared not open now, was stuffy. I thought it would be very horrible if something were to enter a window which was not closed. Now that I could no longer see the figure, I felt that it lingered somewhere in the close shadows, or peered hideously at me from whatever window I did not watch. And so I turned my gaze eagerly and frantically to each successive pane, dreading that I might indeed behold an intrusive regarding face, yet unable to keep myself from the terrifying inspection. But though I watched for hours, there was no longer anything upon the beach. So the night passed, and with it began the ebbing of that strangeness, a strangeness which had surged up like an evil brew within a pot, had mounted to the very rim in a breathless moment, had paused uncertainly there, and had subsided, taking with it whatever unknown message it had borne. Like the stars that promised the revelation of terrible and glorious memories goad us into worship by this deception, and then impart nothing. I had come frighteningly near to the capture of an old secret which ventured close to man's haunts and lurked cautiously just beyond the edge of the known. Yet in the end I had nothing. I was given only a glimpse of the furtive thing, a glimpse made obscure by the veils of ignorance. I cannot even conceive what might have shown itself had I been too close to that swimmer who went shoreward instead of into the ocean. I do not know what might have come if the brew had passed the rim of the pot and poured outward in a swift cascade of revelation. The night ocean withheld whatever it had nurtured. I shall know nothing more. Even yet I do not know why the ocean holds such a fascination for me. But then perhaps none of us can solve those things. They exist in defiance of all explanation. There are men, and wise men, who do not like the sea and its lapping surf on yellow shores. And they think of us strange, who love the mystery of the ancient and unending deep. Yet for me there is a haunting and inscrutable glamour in all the ocean's moods. It is in the melancholy silver foam beneath the moon's waxen corpse. It hovers over the silent and eternal waves that beat on naked shores. It is there when all is lifeless, save for unknown shapes that glide through somber depths. And when I behold the awesome billows surging in endless strength, there comes upon me an ecstasy akin to fear, so that I must abase myself before this mightiness, that I may not hate the clotted waters and their overwhelming beauty. Vast and lonely is the ocean, and even as all things came from it, so shall they return thereto. In the shrouded depths of time none shall reign upon the earth, nor shall any motion be, save in the eternal waters. And these shall beat on dark shores in thunderous foam, though none shall remain in that dying world to watch the cold light of the enfeebled moon playing on the swirling tides and coarse-grained sand. On the deep's margin shall rest only a stagnant foam, gathering about the shells and bones of perished shapes that dwelt within the waters. Silent, flabby things will toss and roll along empty shores, their sluggish life extinct. Then all shall be dark, for at last even the white moon on the distant waves shall wink out. Nothing shall be left, neither above nor below the somber waters. And until that last millennium as after it, the sea will thunder and toss throughout the dismal night.